Joining us now are Jonathan Martin, Politico's politics bureau chief and senior political columnist, and Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary for President Biden. By the way, her new show, Inside with Jen Psaki, premieres this Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern right here on MSNBC. We are very excited for that, Jen, and I will start with you, my friend. You can almost see the establishment wing of the Republican Party watch like its platform fly off into the air like a balloon that's been let go, as they hear what Trump and DeSantis are now saying, specifically about major issues like, foreign policy. My question to you is this how the Republican platform is now going to be shaped? And does it matter what anyone in Congress actually thinks? Is it really DeSantis and Trump who are going to determine where the goalposts lie on the field?
Well, Congress still has the ability to pass legislation, right, and pass funding for Ukraine and things like that. That's important. But Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are currently the two leading contenders for the Republican nomination. And they have decided, Trump a long time ago decided this, that they are going to do America first, right? The Trump motto from when he ran, which means we don't want to get engaged in conflicts. We don't want to get engaged in peacemaking. We don't want to get engaged in foreign policy much at all. Some of those clips you played, though, Alex, were from 6 years ago from Ron DeSantis. They weren't that long ago, which is so important to remember, but it is a repositioning of the current leaders of the Republican Party of who they want to be. And that is a pretty rapid shift in terms of political shifts from where the Republican Party, when John McCain or even Mitt Romney were leading it.
I guess I wonder, Jonathan, whether they understand there's a general election that comes after you become the party nominee, because it seems like, and let's speak more broadly than just foreign policy, but some of these positions that Trump and DeSantis are taking on culture war issues, social issues, issues about education and quote unquote parents' rights, they do not poll well with the vast majority of Americans. And it seems like there's no clear path to actually winning a general election if you stake out these positions in primary season.
Well, let me take the broad question first. We saw in the midterms last year that a lot of Republicans learned all the wrong lessons from Donald Trump, which is to say that you don't have to ever face a general election voter. You can forever live in a primary bubble, and the Republicans learned the hard way that that's not the case, Alex. I think on the more narrow issue of Ukraine, I think Trump and DeSantis, especially DeSantis, are chasing the voters more than they are actually leading them. Look, I think the polling data is pretty clear on this, that as the months have gone on, more and more in the GOP base have sort of grown uneasy about our continued intervention on behalf of the Ukrainians. And somebody like the governor of Florida sees that and does not want to get on the wrong side of the primary voters. And yes, that's what they're focused on right now, is winning that primary first. And they're not thinking about the broader audience that's going to be deciding this election in the fall of 2024.
But I guess I wonder, you seem to be saying that the genesis of this is the base, that he's responding to the base. But I also wonder if there isn't a more sort of craven political calculation here, which is, Ron DeSantis hears Donald Trump compare him to Mitt Romney. Ron DeSantis knows what he said as a congressman 6 years ago, as Jen points out, right, where he was not the general in the culture war that he would propose to be in this day and age. How much of this do you think is him trying to issue a preemptive salvo for the attacks that are going to come his way, courtesy of Trump?
It's a good question. There's no question that DeSantis is consumed with insulating himself on his MAGA flank, if you will. I won't even call it a right flank, because I think those phrases have kind of gotten all muddled in the Trump era, what's right, what's left. But certainly he is fixated on guarding his MAGA flank. You see it obviously now on his stance about Ukraine. You see it with the folks he surrounds himself with, bringing some of the hardline members of the House down to Palm Beach for his big donor retreat. Social media influencers on the right, people he's cultivated in Tallahassee, trying to make them allies. I think he's doing all of that, Alex, because he does not want to give Trump any opening to attack him on the kind of MAGA-style issues. The question is he hurting himself with the other wing of the party, right? Call it the Reagan wing. Yeah.
That's exactly the question, right? As you shore up the base, you lose the general public. You know, Jen, David Frum has a piece in The Atlantic that's a very, solid analysis, I believe, of the DeSantis pseudo-candidacy. And he points this out, which I think a lot of people have missed in the focus on the culture war stuff. More dangerous than the unpopular positions DeSantis holds are the popular positions he does not hold. What is DeSantis' view on health care? He doesn't seem to have one. President Joe Biden has delivered cheap insulin to U.S. users. Good idea or not? Silence from DeSantis. There's no DeSantis jobs policy. He hardly speaks about inflation. Homelessness, the environment, nothing. Even on crime, DeSantis must avoid specifics because specifics might remind his audience that Florida's homicide numbers are worse than New York's or California's. I mean, that is something the White House is probably well aware of. Am I right?
Salivating at the, chomping at the bit. I have a lot of analogies there. I think, Alex, that's how he got here, though. Remember? I mean, he ran an effective communication strategy basically on Twitter and by giving a set of predetermined remarks where he was the strong man, where he was pounding his chest, right, about how much he wasn't going to abide by restrictions on COVID. The vaccine's terrible. I'm returning sanity here. Screw Disney. I mean, all of these things were him being the straw man. The strong man, very strong guy. And so that's how he got here. That is not going to work through the course of a competitive primary. It shouldn't work. I don't think it will because people are going to ask him questions. He's going to have to debate. He's going to have positions. And certainly he will in a general election. But, that strategy is probably why he's here today.
Yeah, well, Jemima, you write about the establishment sort of freaking out about a DeSantis candidacy. And I wonder if your sources give you any indication about whether their alarm bells that they're ringing, at least behind closed doors, are having any effect on the DeSantis campaign proper, because he's meeting with wealthy donors. He certainly hears what's being said in other corners of Congress, whether or not he's acting on any. I mean, do you think that he's aware of how much he may be compromising his own shot? And, by the way, the Republican platform on whole, right? Because this stuff, as you point out, there's a very close relationship between Trump and DeSantis and the Republican base. And what they say shapes opinion in the party. And the last thing the establishment wants to be is at odds with the base.
Yeah, and it's not just the sort of challenge that he's going to have balancing the base of the party versus the general election. It's also within the party itself, Alex, because there's still a robust internationalist wing in the Republican Party. You played clips of a number of senators, certainly from that faction of the party. And this is an important point. The donor class of the party is overwhelmingly tilted toward sort of hawkish, interventionist, whatever you want to call them, that faction. So you can be assured that those folks noticed that comment that he made yesterday about his view of Ukraine, because it contradicts where a lot of the sort of money folks in the party, the contributors are. And I'm telling you, he's going to hear from them in the months ahead, because I know from talking to some of them that they're not happy where he is coming down on the Ukrainian issue, because their view of that issue is much more in line with the Reagan-Bush approach to national security politics. And it's going to be fascinating to see in the months to come what DeSantis does on this Ukrainian issue. Does he stick where he is now, grow even more isolationist, or try to sort of, somewhat moderate his view to appease the kind of donors who are not going to like it at all?
I mean, Jen, how does the White House calibrate its response on the Ukraine issue, right? At once, you don't want to make this into, you want to draw a contrast with the MAGA wing of the party, but you also don't want Ukraine to become a political football. So if you're in the White House right now, how are you managing this?
Well, you also don't want it to become a political problem for Republicans in Congress who are inclined to support funding, right? Yes, it is true. The establishment Republicans, the donor class, are all supporters of, continuing to fund Ukraine. But it can be a narrow vote on these sorts of things. This is part of the reason why President Biden just went to Ukraine, to shore up support, remind the public of how important this is. And if there's a few wigglers in there in the Republican caucus who aren't going to support it because they feel like maybe they want to be in the Trump-DeSantis wing, that's a challenge for them. So, but politically, if you get to a general election, Biden is going to talk about values and who we are as a country. And part of that is standing up against dictators and authoritarians. That is a stronger argument, I think, in a general election. But he may have some shorter term challenges on continuing to get the funding through.
There's just one quick question I have for you, J Mart, which is, we haven't talked much about this since the show began 15 minutes ago. But if there is a Trump indictment, how does DeSantis react to that? Because he needs to court Trump voters, but he also needs to make clear that he's not the guy with criminal charges.
Just real fast on what Jen was saying about the shorter term challenges. This is important. I think Trump and DeSantis coming out as sort of, very dovish on Ukraine, it's most resonant in the House. The Senate's very hawkish. This could really shape GOP opinion in the House and create challenges for Biden on getting funding for Ukraine through the House this year. On the larger issue, Alex, about Trump and the indictments, if you're Ron DeSantis, I don't think you take a swing at that pitch. I think you just let that go by because Trump's going to use that to fire up his core, to raise money off of it among small dollar givers. It's just not something that I think DeSantis wants to get at. If anything, I think it would be an oblique reference about focusing on the future and focusing on attacking Democrats rather than litigating the past. Beyond that kind of a vague reference, I can't see DeSantis or any of the other would-be GOP candidates taking that crack at Trump over indictments.